See this great plant? It's a comfrey, the most associated plant with permaculture. Tell you more about it, and I'll tell you why I don't use it anymore. Stay tuned. So here's an example. This is our original comfrey plant here. Not that big. See, the rhubarb is quite a bit bigger, but this one started to reseed. So you get some plants of it. Here's one, pretty well established. And then keep going. We have another one here. So in this spot, you can see that comfrey does pretty well. This is about the best soil we have on the farm. Good enough for comfrey, but you see it doesn't even grow as well as rhubarb. It's important when you consider what plant to use, you think, hey, how well do I want the plant to grow? Well, I want the plants that we plant to grow like weeds.
Weeds.
Grow an orchard of weeds. You want a permaculture orchard? Have a permaculture orchard of weeds. You say, I don't want weeds. I mean, you want it to grow like weeds. Do you have to feed a weed? Do you have to fertilize a weed? Do you have to water a weed? Do you have to baby a weed? No, it's a weed. It grows without any effort. Well, that's how you want your plants to grow. So let's take a look at this comfrey plant, for example. It's a seedling. It's got a pretty good piece of root, and that's one of its main characteristics. Comfrey is often called a great dynamic accumulator. It's the same with all deep rooting and tap rooting plants. They all accumulate. Dandelion's a great accumulator. It'll go down deeper than the grasses, deeper than most plants, and mine the soil from deeper down and bring it up into the leaves. That's why the leaves are such great mulch ingredients. And you would want to use comfrey as a mulch ingredient. So any deep-rooted one will work with whatever grows like, what? What are you saying?
Weeds.
That's what you want it to do. You want it to grow like a weed. In this part of the permaculture orchard, the soil is better. It holds more moisture. Comfrey can grow a little bit like a weed, but a pretty mild one. I'll show you some areas where, even though we planted it 7 years ago, it's no bigger than this little one. So here's a midway success plant. Well, that's, you know, it's a comfrey. That's about 7 years old, planted right along a drip irrigation line. The red currant's doing better than the comfrey, that's for sure. This one hasn't multiplied, hasn't split, hasn't reseeded, and this is about a medium soil. Look at the size of the leaves. It's still stunted. So I'll show you an even poorer soil. So here's an example in our most desert area. Comfrey, 7 years old. Look at this. This isn't a picture of health. I think it's about this big when I planted it 7 years ago. So keep in mind, comfrey is a dynamic accumulator, but it's got to accumulate something that's already there. If the soil is so poor, like here, that there's very little to accumulate unless you can root right down to the water table and get minerals from deep, deep down, it's not going to accumulate much. So in my definition of what to keep and what not to keep plants that grow like
Weeds.
comfrey does not grow like a weed in most places or most of the soils on miracle farms. So that's why I don't bother with it anymore. If it recedes a little bit, fine, I'll leave it, but I'm not planting it. Another tip, if you are going to plant it and you know that your soil on your property, maybe you have 3 soil variations. Your soil varies. You can say, oh yeah, there it's drier, there it's wetter, and here it's about average. Then plant each test plant you're going to put. Comfrey is a good example. Plant one example in each of those soil types. Put it in the dry, put it in the wet, and put it in the average. The plants after 2 years, my definition is a plant should double every year. After you plant it, give it a year to settle in, and in 2 years, it should have doubled then. If it does, then you go, okay, it worked best in the average soil on your property, then that's where you continue planting it. Don't plant it where the soil is the poorest. It's not the plant that will shine there. So keep that in mind. So here's our topsoil. There's about 2 centimeters, an inch of topsoil. It's mostly just a little bit of organic matter. And right underneath that, we get yellow sand. And it goes down 35 feet. So this is not your ideal site. Today it looks good. Most days it just crumbles like powder. It's not an ideal place for comfrey. So put the right plant in the right place. And I always like to say, it's easier to put the right plant in the right place than it is to make the place right for the plant. Keep that as a tip. Microclimate. I said microclimate can affect the growth of plants. Here's the one way to create a microclimate. You have a tree, you have shade, put your tree above, or rather put your plant under the shade of the tree. So this is the medium soil for the farm. And look at how much better this comfrey, again, a 7-year-old comfrey, but this is 4 times the size of the poorest soil areas in terms of the growth. One of the main reasons, sure, it's right next to a nitrogen fixer, so he's digging down deep to get some of the nutrients, and the comfrey is accumulating it a little bit more because there's a little bit more available. But also the fact that it's shaded, so it keeps the soil moist longer after a rain. So that in itself is a way to extend and improve the growth of a plant like comfrey. So keep microclimate and microsites as an idea in mind for where to put your plants, not just comfrey, but all of them. So microsite, microclimate. Here's another example. Remember, another tip is each tree has basically 2 microsites. Has got a sunny side. Now, south is just almost towards the camera. And the north side is this here, the tree being the middle. Now this tree with its canopy and its trunk is creating a bit more shade, and comfrey doesn't really want to grow extremely well in the shade. But in this case, it's actually doing a bit better. Yes, underneath a honey locust nitrogen fixer tree in the trios. Take a look at the trio video, by the way. Great to understand how the permaculture orchard is planted. Planted on the north side in this case. So we try all different things when we plant to see where it grows better. Let me just show you, if it's not in the sun, almost in the exact same soil, how it responds. And look at this. Also planted on the north side of an apple tree. Not a great apple tree. Pretty average soil here, actually average for our farm, which means poor, not extremely poor. But let your plants talk to you. Here's a good example. It rained an inch overnight and the soil is quite moist. But look at the leaves trying to tell you things. That leaf, and there's a couple others, that one, they didn't get bent or anything. They're just starting to shut down to reduce the amount of water they're losing. Can you imagine? We've had an inch of rain and these plants are saying, you know, it's getting a little dry. So that plant should tell me that obviously this is way too dry for its good success. So let your plants teach you. Wilting is a very easy thing to observe as you get to recognize what a wilted leaf looks like. It's basically full sun, I want it, I got enough moisture. As the leaves close up, means I don't want too much sun, I don't have enough water to get through the day. So the open versus the partly closed versus the almost completely closed leaf is an indicator of wilting. Here's a good example comparison. Kind of looks like comfrey, same leaf pattern, a rosette. Now, there's no irrigation here. Irrigation's in the tree row. Here's no irrigation, and if you look at this, this is really a very, very poor spot. It looks kind of rich because there's a little bit and the soil is moist, but that's very poor soil here. Comfrey versus mullen, this is mullen, it grows better than comfrey on these sites. So if I were to say, yeah, which one should I grow? I would grow mullen as a mulch plant here versus comfrey because it's doing better than a comfrey that gets irrigated. So keep that in mind as an indicator of which plants will be your weeds. You want to grow weeds because you want plants that thrive, not survive. Keep that as a tip. So we saw a few plants, comfrey for sure. We saw mullen, we saw comfrey in a few situations. But here's one, plantain. Now, on our farm, plantain really likes it. Obviously, look at this plant. It's about 4 years old. And this is a plant to me that you can easily chop and drop, and this will provide lots of material. So think in your situation, what plant will provide the amount of mulch you need? Let me show you a little video that we filmed of Rob Avis when he came by, and he was chopping and dropping. Take a look.
Plastic, obviously, because we have a different function, but we grow tons of these types of herbaceous plants that have to be managed all the time. So instead of coming in with, you can use a Leatherman if you need to, but when I'm setting up a food forest, I don't really want to have to be pulling weeds, so we go really heavy with the cover crop. One of my favorites actually right now is Daikon Radish, and we plant it after July 1st once the sun starts to diminish every single day, after the solstice basically. And what happens if you plant it after July 1st is it produces these massive roots, plus you get these huge amounts of green, just like this comfrey here, really high in protein, about 20%. But then you get these 2-3 foot long roots that we just chop the tops off using something like this, like a rice knife, and then it just composts right in the soil. So to manage the weeds around this time of year, we will just take our mulch, and it's a little different here with the plastic, but we literally just will mulch right around the tree. The trick with chopping and dropping is you only want to do it when your precipitation is over evaporation. So once you guys get out of your wet season, you need to let the plants grow again because shade is more valuable than mulch. And then the other thing you have to be really cautious about, these are super sharp, so obviously as you're grabbing them, you don't want to, it's very easy to cut yourself. And then if you have irrigation, you have to be very careful that you don't go through the irrigation pipe. I've done that a few times.
That's how you learn.
And now you're dropping this right at the tree, and then if you're using a nitrogen fixing cover crop like field pea or lima or cowpea or whatever your nitrogen fixing cover crop is, you're fertilizing the ground as you chop the top off. So my food forests, depending on my client and how much they can afford to pay, we always have a lot of cover crops in the system, and so probably twice a year in Calgary I use a cover crop. And the nice thing with cover crops is that you can actually establish your food forest without any of the herbaceous layer for the first couple years until you have the budget to be able to fill that out. So I always plant the overstory first, and then I use cover crops and whatever my client can afford to put in on a herbaceous or a shrub layer and then use a cover crop to fill in the gaps and any annual vegetables as well. But these are awesome tools. Highly recommend owning one.
So we took a look at Comfrey, how we can use it, what it's good for, why we don't use it anymore. Take a look around at your property, what grows well. You want things to grow like a weed. You like this? Share, subscribe, and you want more information, please get the film, The Permaculture Orchard, Beyond Organic, available at permacultureorchard.com. Take a look at that. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Available at permacultureorchard.com. Available at permaculture.